What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Borderlands 2 video, and today I figured we could do a build guide for a character that I don't think I've ever done a video on, and that is Maya the Siren. Now before we start, I'm mainly going to be focusing on skill trees for this video rather than a full and complete build with specific gear recommendations. My reasoning for going this route is because I'm trying to put together a build that possesses the best flexibility for class mods and by extension allows for the best flexibility when it comes to what kind of gear you want to use. After all, being able to swap a class mod and radically change the function of your build is preferable to constantly having to change around your spec to accommodate all of the gear that you're using. That said, if you are looking for recommended gear for Maya, I actually have a pretty good video that I did a while back on the best gear for Maya, so be sure to check that out if you're having a hard time finding some good stuff to use. Also, I will be providing level 50 and level 72 OP8 versions of my build/skill trees. That way, if you're on PC and you don't want to buy the DLC, or if you already have all the DLC already, then you should be able to get something out of this video. And finally, if this video helped you, definitely be sure to smash like, and also, I bet no one has better Siren build ideas in the comments section below. I am the best Siren builder of all time, and literally no one is as great as me. Otherwise, guys, let's just go ahead and start by talking about Maya's skill tree and what skills you should pick and which ones you shouldn't. Now, there are a lot of opinions out there, but I typically think Maya is at her best when you are either A, optimizing a build around phase lock, or B, optimizing a build around your healing and co-op abilities. In essence, I think that is the core of the character, and when discussing each of Maya's three subtrees, which are Cataclysm, Harmony, and Motion, I will be approaching them from, I guess, those two schools of thought. Of the three skill trees, I think it's fair to say that Cataclysm is by far the best, and assuming you have the skill points, it's a good idea to allocate 26 skill points here to acquire the capstone, which is Ruin. Ruin makes it so that Maya's phase lock will slag the phase locked target, in addition to applying some shock and corrosive status effects. For late game and even early game, applying slag in this way can be very effective and will allow you to melt everything from generic mobs to ultimate badasses with relative ease. The question is, how should you allocate your skill points to reach that capstone? Well, starting with Tier 1, you can choose between Flicker and Foresight. Flicker is a skill that boosts your elemental effect chance, while Foresight is a skill that boosts your magazine size and reload speed. Elemental effects, with the exception of Slag, become kind of useless at higher levels, thus you probably don't need more chance to inflict them. However, Foresight's boosts to your magazine size and reload speed can provide a decent DPS boost to any weapon you use. Thus, if I had to pick between the two skills, it makes more sense to go with Foresight, and that is where I'd recommend you allocate your first 5 skill points. Moving on to Tier 2, we have Immolate and Helios. Now, this one is a bit tricky since Immolate, while not as insane as it used to be, is a pretty good skill for achieving second wins, while Helios, despite being kind of weak and mostly level dependent, is a skill that's boosted by a number of popular class mods for Maya. If I had to pick just one, I'd go with Immolate, and as stated, investing in Helios could make sense depending on the class mods you're using. So I'll recommend both, though I will strongly suggest that you pick up Immolate as it's going to be more useful down the line when you get to the later game. As for Tier 3, we have what are arguably some of Maya's best skills in the form of Chain Reaction and Cloud Kill. While Backdraft is okay and has some awesome niche uses, I wouldn't recommend it in most scenarios. The same can't be said about Chain Reaction and Cloud Kill, which are pretty phenomenal on any build and potentially at any level. Cloud Kill makes your first playthrough a virtual cakewalk due to how powerful the skill is, while Chain Reaction is great for dealing damage to enemies near the enemy that you just phase locked, and works well with a certain special skill called Converge that I'll be discussing shortly. Ultimately, pick up both of these skills and you won't regret it. This brings us to the final two skills in the tree aside from Ruin, and those are Reaper and Blight Phoenix. Honestly, both of these skills are pretty good, though Reaper is more of the essential equip and I would recommend that you max it out. This is because Reaper's increased damage is really great on all enemies that have more than 50% of their health left, and this can be especially useful if you're trying to do a lot of sniping, because you can phase lock an enemy, you could pull out your sniper and aim for that critical hit spot, and you're going to deal more damage than you would if you had an enemy that was at lower health. Blight Phoenix, on the other hand, just makes you look cool while in multiplayer, and also can be used to improve your survivability when paired with a certain skill called Life Tap from the Harmony tree that I will also be going over shortly. Now, the damage on Blight Phoenix kinda sucks, and thus you may find it's better to put the points for it into Helios. However, I would recommend you experiment, and ultimately, just make sure that you max out Reaper, as that's a really great skill, while you can either pump those 4 remaining points that you need to get to Ruin into either Blight Phoenix or Helios. Overall though, I think you'll agree that Cataclysm is pretty great and would be a good choice for new players to max out if they like to play more offensively. However, and if you want to go the co-op route, then I would highly recommend Harmony, which we can talk about now. What's great about the Harmony tree is that it can provide some offensive power, additional bulk, and some great co-op abilities your co-op partners will greatly appreciate. The capstone here is Scorn, which allows you to melee and sort of like one-hand Hadouken this slag ball, which can potentially slag enemy targets. Assuming you're getting Scorn, here is how I would allocate the 25 or so skill points leading up to it. Now, unlike Cataclysm, which I would say is pretty straightforward, you're going to have a lot of options as far as tier 1 through 3 go in Harmony. To narrow things down a bit, it's important to think about whether you're going to be wanting to play co-op or solo, and whether you're going for more of an offensive style or a better defensive style with some added bulk. Assuming you're going for offense and solo play, picking up a combination of Sweet Release and Mind's Eye from tier 1, Wreck from tier 2, and then Elated from tier 3 makes a lot of sense. Elated and Sweet Release should help you with your healing capabilities, with the former providing passive health regen while Phase Lock is active, and Sweet Release providing a number of healing orbs based on skill point investment. Mind's Eye and Wreck, on the other hand, can be great for DPS, with the former boosting crit damage, while the latter improves your fire rate and damage while enemies are phase locked. So in that sense, both Mind's Eye and Wreck can be great choices for solo playstyles where offense and phase lock optimization should be a priority. Conversely, and for co-op builds, it might be a good idea to roll back some of your investment in Mind's Eye and Wreck, and pump some of those points into skills like Restoration and Res. Res is a must-have skill for co-op as it allows you to revive your teammates from a distance, while Restoration allows you to shoot your friends and heal them in the process. You can really take advantage of this by using a Norfleet launcher, as you can heal your friends while subsequently annihilating your enemies. So, as I said, cutting back on some of the more offensive-based skills like Mind's Eye and Wreck would be a good idea to get skills like Restoration and Res. The only other skill we haven't mentioned yet from this tree is Recompense. This skill allows the player to take health damage and have a % chance to deal that damage back to attackers, and if you ask me, I think it's a skill you can do without because you have to have high investment and water comms in order to use it effectively. Plus, and compared to Elated and Res, Recompense is just less useful, so stick to the other 5 skills in these first 3 tiers, and I think you'll agree that it's a better use of your skill points. Speaking of less desirable skills though, we have tier 4 Sustenance. The health regen bonus here is based on how low your health is, meaning you're only getting the max bonus with like 1 health or whatever, and that decreases as you gain more health. Because of that, your skill points here I think are better placed in Elated, so like Recompense, this is another skill you can skip. Finally, we have Life Tap, which is actually pretty good, and I'd recommend that you max it out. While it's a kill skill and you may not always possess the ability to use it, the lifesteal percentage can get pretty high and allow you, even if temporarily, to replicate the lifesteal that's on par with or exceeds many Moxie weapons. Additionally, Life Tap also works well with Blight Phoenix and can provide an additional layer of bulk against enemies that are predominantly using melee attacks. So that's another worthwhile use of that skill. Ultimately, these are the skills I would pick for the Harmony tree, and now it's about time we went over the skills to pick for the Motion tree. So motion is pretty similar to harmony in that you can choose either skill for tier 1, however, the later tiers end up being a lot more straightforward from my experience. As far as tier 1 is concerned, you have the choice between Ward, which is a skill that boosts the capacity of your shields, and Accelerate, which improves gun damage and projectile speed. Choosing either, I would say, is a matter of whether you want better defense or offense, and depending on what weapons you're using, as some unique weapons don't play well with Accelerate's projectile speed bonuses. So really, and again, I think you could pick either skill here. Moving on to tier 2, we have Suspension and Kinetic Reflection. While Kinetic Reflection is cool and it allows you to deflect bullets, you're obviously limited to this only working against enemies that are shooting with guns, while Suspension is a skill that improves phase lock duration and can work any time you successfully phase lock an enemy. Plus, many skills that we've discussed previously, like Elated, Wreck, and Chain Reaction, have really great synergy with this skill, as they can now maintain their effects for longer, provided you've spec'd for Suspension. So for tier 2, I'm going to have to give it to Suspension, because overall, I think it's just more useful. This brings us to tier 3, where we have Fleet, Inertia, and Converge. Though all three of these are pretty good skills, with Fleet being highly recommended by me if you're going to be doing any farming, speccing for Inertia and Converge just makes more sense from a combat perspective. After all, Fleet only works with your shield being depleted, and since Inertia provides passive shield recharge and boosts your reload speed, it just makes more sense to spec for Inertia. Also, Converge is just a really great one-point wonder skill as it draws in a bunch of enemies at once, and it works really well with Chain Reaction, so I would highly recommend you pick it up as well. And now we have our final three tiers, which are Tier 4's Quicken, Tier 5 Subsequence, and Tier 6, which also contains the capstone, which is Thought Lock. Of the three, Thought Lock is pretty hit or miss, and personally, I wouldn't recommend it. After all, locking enemies in place is what makes phase lock so great, and all this really does is enthralls a phase lockable enemy to fight for you for a short period of time. So in that sense, I think phase lock is worth skipping. As for the other two skills, Quicken is great for reducing your cooldown with phase lock, and thus it's essential, while Subsequence allows you to send out an orb that seeks out another enemy and phase locks them automatically, thus potentially allowing you to perform a chain phase lock on multiple enemies. For these last three tiers, I'd recommend you max out both Quicken and Subsequence, and then use whatever points you would normally put into Thought Lock, and then use it to max out Inertia. And if you do that, that should complete your full 26-point allocation for the motion tree. That said, feel free to experiment with Thought Lock if you want, but I will just say I'm not a huge fan of this skill. In general, and between all three of Maya's subtrees, this is usually how I would go about allocating my skill points to each one. Assuming you're at level 50, you can pick one of these three routes and max it to 26 points and still have about 20 skill points left over, while level 72 characters can max out two subtrees and have about 15 skill points left over. As for what you should do with those remaining points, well, that's what builds are for, and here's what I would do for more of a offensive/solo type build for Maya at both level 50 and level 72 OP8. As you can see in both the level 50 and level 72 versions of this solo build, I've gone pretty heavy into Cataclysm, allocating all 26 points into that tree. While there's varying levels of investment between builds due to the number of skill points on offer, you'll notice that I tend to invest pretty heavily in motion, totally maxing it out in the level 72 build, and then I invest less in harmony to get some additional survivability. The main reason I go this route at both level 50 and 72 is because both setups should allow you to phase lock, which activates Ruin and Converge, pulling enemies in, potentially slagging them, and then you can use Chain Reaction and the lingering damage from Cloud Kill to finish them off. These main skill combos are really the core of the build, while pretty much everything else either makes you better at dealing damage or makes you slightly bulkier in the case of Sweet Release. This is especially apparent in the level 72 build, where we pick up skills like Wreck, Quicken, and Subsequence, which just bolster the power of phase lock and make it better. In my humble opinion, the level 72 spec in particular makes the most sense since it gives you the best compatibility with the binder class mods of both the non and legendary variety, the cat class mods of the non and legendary variety, the legendary Siren, the Slayer of Terramorphous, the Fox class mod, and potentially also the Warder class mods. You may also even be able to get a Banshee comm to work too, provided you do a respec where maybe you move some of those points from Ward to Fleet, or maybe if you move some of those skill points from Helios to Backdraft. As for level 50 players, you won't be getting as much compatibility, but you still should be able to get a decent amount of compatibility with the Legendary Siren and Slayer of Terramorphous class mods, provided you substitute a point or two from Accelerate and put it into Mind's Eye. And in fact, I'd recommend you use either of those comms at level 50, as those are the best class mods that you should be able to get at that level, because you won't have access to things like the Legendary Binder, Legendary Cat, or the Legendary Nurse normally. Really though, I'd say it's the level 72 version of this build that really excels and offers the most flexibility, while I think the level 50 version just makes the most sense from an offensive perspective. The thing is, Cataclysm just has too many powerful skills to pass up, like Immolate, Chain Reaction, Cloud Kill, Ruin, and Reaper, while the best most other trees can muster are things like Accelerate and Wreck, which aren't bad on their own, but they're just not as good. All in all, I'd say both of these builds are pretty solid, and while you could probably do some substitutions here and there, like maybe swapping some of the points in motion around to get to the inertia skill, again, I think both of these setups are pretty good and will help you out a lot in most use cases. At this point, it's just a matter of finding yourself a Sandhawk, a relic that boosts the Sandhawk's damage, and then get yourself a B-Shield and you should be good to go. However, now let's talk about the co-op healer type build I've put together, which is a bit more complex. Like the solo Cataclysm build I just went over, the main reason I've done what I've done here is to mainly achieve the best class mod flexibility. Again, while you're not necessarily going to get all of the ideal flexibility at the level 50 spec, you're still getting the primary core of the build here, which involves heavy investment in the Harmony tree so we can get skills like Sweet Release, Restoration, Res, and Elated. Plus, you've got some other interesting skills here as well, like Scorn, which you can use to weaken enemies and help your co-op partners deal more damage, and the inclusion of Life Tap should provide additional bulk upon scoring a kill. Focusing on the level 50 spec for a second, the main reason I decided to do what I did here mainly revolves around Cloud Kill, which is incredibly powerful early on and can allow you to make short work of most enemies pretty easily. To get there, I went with Foresight and Immolate, as I think both are far better than Flicker and Helios, and then after that, I put the leftover points into Ward for some additional bulk, and pumped the rest of my points into Suspension to get some better cooldown for Phase Lock. I guess you could forgo Cloud Kill and maybe use some of those points in the motion tree, but again, I think it makes the most sense to get Cloud Kill here because it's such a good skill. As for our level 72 spec, we obviously have a lot more legroom to work with here, and as you can see, I've gone full into both Cataclysm and Harmony with some of the remaining points put into motion to help round out the build. The thing is, and as I mentioned when discussing the previous build, the skills in Cataclysm are just too good to pass up. And with the way I've spec'd here, you're actually getting a lot of the core of the solo build within this build. So that's pretty cool. Also, you're really only losing compatibility with the Legendary Siren, the Slayer of Terramorphous, and both the Legendary Cat and Cat class mods here, while you're gaining compatibility with the Legendary Nurse, the Regular Nurse, the Cleric, the Trickster, and the Matriarch class mods. This is pretty good if you ask me, because you're really only losing compatibility with about 4 class mods, while you're gaining compatibility with 5. So you may actually find the co-op build here is more flexible than the solo build was. In general, I think you'll find this is pretty solid. However, there is one noteworthy substitution I'd recommend you try, and that is substituting Helios for Blight Phoenix on our level 72 spec. While this will cut some compatibility with the Binder and Legendary Binder comms, it is worth noting that Helios isn't especially powerful at OP8, and while Blight Phoenix isn't really either, you may find that Blight Phoenix can pair well with Life Tap. Again, try things and experiment, but I've found I actually like it quite well against enemies that will only attack you with melee attacks. Overall though, I think you'll find that this co-op build is pretty versatile and should allow you a great deal of flexibility. Just be sure to get yourself a decent rocket launcher, a shield, and maybe a nurse comm of either the legendary or non-legendary variety. After that, you can pretty much use whatever you want, so long as it's not the Rough Rider due to all of the shield-related skills that we just spec'd for. At the end of the day, guys, I think you'll find these two builds will usually cover about 99% of what you want to do in Borderlands 2 with Maya. Some respects are certainly warranted if you want to take advantage of Fleet and a Rough Rider shield, or if you want to put together a backdraft build that uses a Shock Slow hand and a Transformer. But beyond that, I think your bases are pretty well covered, and both of these builds, regardless of which one you choose, will allow you to do pretty much everything you probably ever want to with Maya. Otherwise, guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to leave a like, leave a comment in the comment section below, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more Borderlands videos, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.